In this video we go looking for a rare wading bird, and I have a nightmare with gull identification, so much so I need help. With nearly a week before the kids had to go back to school and I had to go back to work, we thought, what could be better than a birding adventure up and down the country? Hey folks, we're in a bit of a dark van, hence the torch being held up by Olivia.
We've got
a lighting engineer now. Things are looking up. We are in Lincolnshire for the start of a week, well, kind of 5 or 6 days of twitching. And this may go over a few videos, we don't know, depends how lucky we are. Hopefully tomorrow we're going to try and find a bared sandpiper, which is a rarity. Fingers crossed it may be here. So stick with us and we'll see you in the morning. Myself and Olivia got up early as Kaylee was getting ready and headed for a quick walk to the 360 hide. Passing some stunning sunflowers on the way, we arrived at the hide. To a big surprise, the usually flooded scrape was dry. Really dry. We had to look out quite far to see any water. Pretty soon we found a sign that the RSPB had put up to explain this. Essentially, it's to maintain food sources for the birds coming later in the season. Regardless of this dryness, we still found some water a little further out and scanned which birds we could see. There were a small number of waders, mainly avocet. This species were present in reasonable numbers throughout the reserve, and as we watched, a black-tailed godwit flew in. There were a few ducks present that were quite hard to identify. This one wasn't so much. It was the always pretty obvious shelduck. After at least picking up a few birds for the day, we headed back towards the van and Kaylee, passing on the other side of the reserve a lot of spoonbill. I think I counted about 16, which was the most I've ever seen anywhere in the UK. As we got onto the path towards the van, there was a flock of birds that were flying in and out of the vegetation. These were goldfinch, and many of these birds were young, with only a few adults amongst them. But now it was time to find Kaylee and head towards the salt marsh where the bared sandpiper had been seen the previous day. We are back at it. Kaylee's with us and we're headed up towards the salt marsh in the hope there might be something there. We walked up onto the grass ridge which separates the salt marsh from the main part of the reserve, seeing en route this cormorant that had just been fishing. We walked along the path with the salt marsh on one side and some pools on the other. The previous day the bared sandpiper had been seen on one of the pools. So we scanned amongst all the birds for every small wader we could see. Although not packed with birds as it wasn't high tide yet, there was still plenty of life present, and we did see a few wading birds like common sandpiper and a good number of ringed plover. We finally got to a section of the pools where there was some other birders. We set up the scope and looked over the shallow water and the sandbank at all the birds that were here, including this lovely pied wagtail that was feeding really close to us. Further out on one of the grassy banks there was a group of snipe, and as we carried on searching, more snipe showed up. Also, we got a lovely sighting of a wood sandpiper, which is the wading bird preening at the back of this footage. After quite a while of searching and no reports of our intended target, we decided to answer our rumbling stomachs and go to the cafe for some breakfast and a brew, passing this wonderful hooper swan en route. Whilst we were eating our breakfast, another birder told us about a bar-headed goose that had been seen on the reserve. So once our breakfast was done, we headed to try and find that, and due to very good directions from the other birder, we found it sleeping with some other geese. We don't know at all what the origin of this bird is, and it may be a descendant of an escaped bird or an escaped bird itself, but nevertheless we're going to count it on our year list. This is a species I'd only ever seen in Germany before, and it's a lifer for Kaylee. Hey folks, we just got a lifer for Kaylee and Liv, which is a bar-headed goose. I don't know the origin of it, but it's here and it's asleep. So, and it's written down, so we are counting it. So that's another bird for the year list. Excellent. That leaves us with only 9 more species to see until we hit our 240 bird target. and as the tide was coming in, we decided to head down the bank in the other direction to a lagoon where some other birders were patiently waiting for birds to come in on the high tide. When we arrived, the birders said that the bird sandpiper still hadn't been seen, but there were some other birds of interest here, namely curlew sandpiper. This is a species we saw a few weeks ago at Kilnsea wetlands, and although the birds there were adults and in lovely red summer plumage, these birds, although youngsters, were much closer and gave us really nice views. Not only that, they were feeding with a similar dunlin, so you can see obviously the size difference between the two species. We stood and waited on the exposed windy grass bank, patiently hoping the bird sandpiper would show up as the tide got to its highest. We had plenty of ring plover and dunlin turn up and geese fly over, but unfortunately the bird sandpiper didn't show, and turns out it hasn't been seen there since, so we were a day late. Hey folks, we're a touch windswept.
Very.
It's breezy here. We unfortunately didn't get the bird sandpiper. We waited around until high tide and it didn't show up. Luckily though, we did get the bar-headed goose, which was a bit of a wild card really. We weren't expecting that, so that's another bird for the year list. We've only got another 9 to go before hitting our target. So stick with us.
It's getting harder though.
It is getting harder, yeah.
It's definitely getting harder.
We're going to head up north now. We're in Lincolnshire now. We're going to head into Yorkshire. So join us for that. We headed a few hours north to one of our favourite spots, Kilnsea and Spurn. Hey folks, we have come up north a couple of hours to Kilnsea wetlands. What trip of the UK birding is right without a trip to Spurn area? So we're going to stay here overnight and possibly the morning and see what we can find. We're hoping there might be a Caspian gull here to add to our year list. And yes, we know we've been here recently, but get used to it folks, because this place is excellent for birding. And I was here to tick off one of the last gulls on my year list, barring the really rare ones of course, and recently there'd been a first year Caspian gull here. So this meant checking through all of these young gulls for one that looked a bit different from a herring gull. And if you've seen previous videos, you may know I'm rubbish at this. Regardless, the task began, and the first few I picked out seemed to be lesser black-backed gulls. These birds were generally darker in appearance, with far more mottling on the head and front and darker wings. I did notice this gull in the water, which had a few characteristics which could make it a Caspian gull, but I couldn't confirm it, so this remains a question mark. As I continued searching through every single gull here, Kaylee and Olivia lost a bit of patience. As they wandered off, I did notice a couple of gulls which definitely weren't herring gulls. These weren't the Caspian gull, these were Mediterranean gulls. There was this individual that was definitely a Mediterranean gull, and also these two. Now I thought it was time to probably catch up with the girls. Hey folks, the girls have gone ahead because I've been trying to identify Caspian gulls, which I've had a long history of not being able to do. The ones that are there, I can't confirm currently any of them are or not, because it's a youngster apparently that's here. So I'm going to try and get some assistance. Once I'd caught up with the girls, who'd obviously lost patience with my gull hunt, we looked through the birds present at this side of the reserve. There was a good number of sandwich terns here, sitting in small groups on any exposed bit of sand. There didn't appear to be quite as many gulls at this side. We did get a brief flyover from a little egret, and as I scanned the grass bank in front of me, I did notice this hare that was sat in the grass amongst a group of grey-lag geese. It was now time to move on and head back towards the van. But I stuck behind for a short while because I wanted one last look in the hide, as I was determined to find this Caspian gull. And my perseverance paid off. Before long, finding some very interesting gulls, including this definite Caspian gull. The idea of this bird and the following couple of birds were assisted by a lot of research and asking some people who really know. So a big thank you to everybody who helped. Not only did I find this Caspian gull, but I found this very interesting Caspian yellow-legged gull hybrid. Apparently this was a bird that was rung in the Netherlands early this year and was known to be present here. Not only did that take us to only 8 birds left on our year list, we spotted another new gull in the shape of a young yellow-legged gull. A bird on my own I couldn't have ID'd and wasn't expecting to see, so that takes us down to 7 species left to hit our target. What a successful little visit. Following this, we had a quick walk into Church Field, where there weren't too many birds, there was plenty of dragonflies, and unfortunately a lot of biting insects. So we hot-footed it back out and on towards the warren. We had a quick trip to Church Field, but exited quite quickly because we were bitten to shreds by mosquitoes. Now heading down towards the warren to see if there's anything about. When we arrived, it was low tide and pretty quiet. There were a few of the normal species about, like wood pigeons, and a lovely kestrel that was hunting above our heads. Looking out onto the mudflats in front of us, there were a small number of waders, mostly ringed plover, although Kaylee did notice this silhouetted golden plover in the distance. By this point it was getting quite late, but we still had enough time to have a quick nip to Canal Scrape. This hide looks over a small pool, which generally has quite a bit of life. This evening was no different. There was a group of mallard that were upending and feeding. There was also a little grebe. We often do see this species here, and this one had caught himself a little fish. As we looked on, we had a brief visit from a young curlew that flew in, saw us, and flew straight back out again. This curlew was soon followed by a little egret. This one decided to stick around and do some fishing. It was now time to head back to the van as it was slowly starting to get dark. One of the fields near where we'd parked did harbour a new bird for the day though. Amongst the curlews feeding there was also a whimbrel, which is one of the curlew's smaller cousins, and significantly rarer. So this was a lovely bird to end our day, and as the starlings came into roost, we did too. We had some food and called it a night. I got up early and headed down to the warren as the girls got ready, and I'm glad I did. Good morning folks, I'm here at Spurn. I've just been for a wander while the girls are getting ready. I bumped into some of the guys who do the bird ringing here, which is really good for conservation, and anyway they were very informative, and I got lovely views of a young magpie and a young blackbird that they'd caught and were ringing and gathering information. So we're going to head out today, hopefully up north, to see what we can find. Not only is the ringing process exceptionally important for conservation, it gives us key information on species movements, populations and health. And as much as I'd love to stick around and watch, we did have to move on and head north. This time to try and settle an old score. This meant a trip to Top Hill Low Nature Reserve. Just cooking eggs. After a delicious breakfast, we headed into the reserve and to one specific hide. Hey folks, we are at Top Hill Low Nature Reserve. We've come here, how's Liv? We've come here, Kelly's in front of me, if you're wondering where she is. We've come here to try and find a blue-winged teal that we tried to find a couple of videos ago and failed. I spoke to someone this morning who saw it a few days ago, who's saying it's an eclipse, which makes things a little bit more challenging. That's like it's molted all its breeding feathers. So anyway, we're going to step up to the challenge and head to the hide now. This duck evaded us earlier in the year, so I was determined to find it this time, but the odds, unfortunately, were stacked against us. Not only is this individual notoriously elusive, it's also in eclipse plumage. This is when all the ducks molt, and basically now all the males look a bit like females. This makes it extremely difficult to not only pick out the males from the females, but to even differentiate between species, especially at a distance. Another birder here did help us out with some key features, but these features were only small. We continued to search, but very soon 2 hours had passed without any luck. This moment of frustration might be a good time to ask everyone who's watching to please like this video and also subscribe to our channel, as it helps us more than you know, and remember to press that notification bell. Right, back to our search. As myself and Kaylee were systematically going through each duck in front of us, a marsh harrier flew over, and everything scattered. After it passed, all the lapwings landed and so did the ducks, but all in different places, so our task began again. By this time it was well into the afternoon and we were all getting a bit frustrated. We'd all got to the end of our tether, but we'd seen a lot of cool birds here today. Not only had we seen the marsh harrier that had flushed all the ducks, we'd had reasonable views of quite a few wading birds, like this group of young dunlin, and this pair of snipe that were feeding quite close to the near bank, and the bird which is always a star on this reserve, the green sandpiper. This is the best place I know of in the UK to see this species up close, and they never disappoint. Hey folks, again, yeah, again, no blooming tail. Regardless of this disappointment, it had been a good couple of days and we'd picked up 3 new birds for our year list. Now it was time to head north, very north, into Scotland. This took us nearly 5 hours, and when we arrived it was dark, so we went to sleep, excited for what the next day would bring. Spoiler alert, it's a mega. Hey folks, sorry we didn't get back to you yesterday. It was late when we arrived at our overnight stay, but we're now
In Scotland!
Let's get birding.
Yippee!
Tune in next week for the Scottish part of our adventure. Thanks for watching.